Welcome to the podcast, Chuckie.
Thank you.
Starting off, we always have to ask this. What do you actually do?
It's a broad question. So my role is as a museum preparator, which mostly focuses on taxidermy, but it can be anything from taxidermy to creating displays and sort of getting everything ready to go on display. So skeleton preparation, models. We do a lot of sculpting and molding of like lifelike animals that we can't necessarily taxidermy. It's a broad job that covers a lot of things.
How on earth do you end up doing that as a job?
A lot of random turns through life. I was always interested in it. I think as a kid, I thought it was the most fascinating thing ever, and I sort of loved science, but I sort of went the way of art. So until 5 or 6 years ago, I was working backstage in theatre.
Oh, cool.
And a lot of the training for that was sculpting and moulding and that sort of thing. But I got a job overseas in Dubai where I worked for a couple of months, where it kind of... I'd been working in theatre for a while and like really enjoying it, working backstage and on Fringe Festival, that sort of thing. But I kind of fell out of love with it a little bit when I was over in Dubai. So when I came back to Australia, I thought, you know what, I'm going to take a couple months off and just do whatever I want to do, which had been taxidermy. So I contacted a wildlife clinic and sent them an email. I had to think carefully how to word it because basically I said to them, look, I'm wanting to learn taxidermy. I'm really passionate about ecology and, conserving nature and that sort of thing. I want to learn taxidermy. Do you have any deceased animals that I might be able to use? And surprisingly, they messaged back and they were really keen for it. So,
cool.
Yeah, I watched a couple of videos on YouTube and had a red hot go at home. Had a couple of mistakes and a couple of funny looking possums and that sort of thing. And then I got in contact with a lady at the museum who's their senior preparator who does taxidermy, and she was giving me some advice on how to go about doing it, how I could improve, and eventually that turned into work experience. So I spent a couple of months actually on and off for about a year going and learning taxidermy from her. So kind of developed from there.
What are some kind of essential skills you think you need to have to be a good taxidermist?
I don't even know where to start.
Yeah.
But I think attention to detail. It's one of those things that you can't half do it. And I think also it's one of those things that you've really got to have a passion to do. You've got to really want to do it because, to be honest, it's a bit gruesome because you are dissecting animals, and you kind of have to work through that. I mean, I've got a pretty strong stomach, and I've always been interested in kind of the macabre and curiosities and that sort of thing. But even I find at times that you'll have to kind of just swallow and keep going with it. Yeah. But also, even aside from skills, it's a really hard thing to get into because there's just not many avenues for it. You kind of just have to teach yourself and hope that you find someone that can teach you. Over in England, they have some schools and stuff, but in Australia, for the most part, there are some small courses you can do here and there in Perth. But yeah, most people that I've met have been self-taught and then have gone on to find someone who could mentor them. So,
do you hope to mentor someone else one day?
I would love to. I think not yet because I'm probably not where I want to be before I start teaching people. But I love passing on knowledge. And I mean, I think that's one of the great things about working in museums is that you get to just pass on knowledge about everything and anything. And yeah, definitely.
That's something overwhelmingly we've heard from people at museum is there's lots of sharing of information, which is lovely. I
did begin to teach my brother taxidermy, but life got in the way, so we haven't actually finished that project yet. But yeah, so I've got a freezer full of projects at my wonderful mother's house at the moment. So yeah.
I feel like that sets the tone really well for our next section, which is our questionable questions.
Okay.
These are from the broader particle team, so Zara and Michael who are with us and a couple of other people as well. Would you ever taxidermy your own pet?
So we've got stick insects at home.
Oh.
And believe it or not, you can kind of taxidermy stick insects. You preserve them in the way that I always get this wrong. I always go to say etymologists. It's entomologists. It's terrible, but in the way that entomologists do. So you clean them up, dry them out, and pin them and that sort of thing. So I do have designs to do that for some of our stick insects. As far as pets go, I don't know that I could do it to my own pets. I originally thought that I could, and like I thought it would be a quite nice way to remember them. But like I've gotten quite attached to pets now that I think it'd be a bit heartbreaking to see them. But that being said, I have seen some really beautiful pet taxidermy done. Particularly, there's like a sleeping pose. So if you imagine a cat curled up on the floor and it tucks its head under its arm, or like a dog in a similar position, and those are like really beautiful pieces of taxidermy because it's not trying to make the animal alive; it just looks like the animal's sleeping. So I think that it can actually be done in a respectful and actually beautiful way.
Just hard to do your own pet, I imagine.
Yeah. I also I've had a lot of people ask me if I would do their taxidermy their pets. The tricky thing with it is I would say yes, but it would have to depend on the kind of on the person and the view that they have of their pet. Because again, it's with you might not be able to tell that a dog doesn't look like a dog did when it was alive, but the person will.
Yes.
And like one of the hardest parts to get right about pet taxidermy would be the eyes, because you look at your puppy dog's eyes and that sort of thing, and they do. You'd know if they don't look how they did back then. So if I had a friend that wanted to taxidermy their dog who I knew was like really attached to their dog, I'd probably say no, because I can't make it look how the dog did. But if I had like a friend who's like me, who's a bit quirky and wants to get, their dog or ferrets or anything like that, then it could be done in a way that person's happy with it. But I'd want to make sure that they know what they're getting into before I go and, I actually did get to taxidermy a 40-year-old, I think it was 40-year-old barn owl.
Whoa.
One of the wildlife centres, it couldn't be returned to the wild, so it had stayed with the lady in charge of the wildlife centre, and it passed away sadly. But because I had such a good relationship with them and they had helped me get off the ground with my taxidermy, they asked if I could taxidermy it for her. So thankfully she was really happy with how it turned out. And so, it was beautiful.
That's a good example of when it's quite special and they can still tell the story of the 40-year-old owl.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you, maybe not you specifically, but can people taxidermy humans?
Yes. And it's been done, although questionably.
Yeah.
So the trick with it, it's bizarre to talk about this. The trick with it is, if you think about birds and mammals, they have feathers and fur to hide the skin. So when you actually taxidermy them, if you were to push away the feathers, the skin takes on a lifeless quality. It'll look yellow, or it'll be tanned like leather. So there have been people who have taxidermied people, and you kind of tan the skin and turn it into leather.
Wow.
It never ends up looking like people, because that uncanny valley thing is almost impossible to get right. And obviously the skin ends up having to be painted over, and you end up with these like really weird patchy things. But there's a guy called Gunther von Hagens, who's a amazing nut job. I think he's from Germany, and he invented plastination. I don't know if you've heard about that. So there's an exhibit that tours called the Amazing Human Body exhibit.
Okay.
And basically what he's done is he's taken people who've donated their bodies to science, or specifically to his thing. He preserves them in ethanol to take all the water out, and then he puts them in a vacuum in a tub of silicon. So the ethanol evaporates, and all of the ethanol is replaced with silicon. So all the veins, every tissue, every cell is impregnated with silicon, and then he catalyzes it, so it turns into, so it solidifies, and you end up with actually just a really lifelike human body.
Wow.
All the veins are intact, all the stomach, all like everything's intact. So you can actually do amazing kind of like medical displays of like, I saw one where it's kind of diverting from taxidermy a bit, but they had the entire nervous system of humans, because they put the silicon into the nervous system and then dissolved away the rest of the person. So you end up with this like spider web in the shape of a human. Spider web in the shape of a human of veins.
That would be phenomenal.
Yeah,
to see.
it's incredible. They've actually used plastination at the new museum for a lot of the reptiles on display.
Okay.
Reptiles are really hard to taxidermy because their skin is really, really thick, even under the scales. It's really hard to actually take all the pajamas off.
Yeah.
So they plastinate it, and it preserves the color a bit better. And then if that fades, they have to paint it. But yeah.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah, it's really, really cool. I mean, you've got to be mad to invent something like that.
100%. A little bit weird.
Yeah, yeah.